Thank you all for introducing yourself in the chat. If you haven't already, please do so. And thank you all for coming to our very last hack night. Before we get into hack night, I'm just going to provide a brief overview of Erie Hack, as well as provide a few reminders of the schedule. So Erie Hack is a program of Cleveland Water Alliance, a water technology innovation cluster based out of Northeast Ohio. And ever since our very first Erie Hack in 2017, it has been our vision to bring together teams of creatives, engineers, techies, and entrepreneurs, and anyone who has a stake in Lake Erie to solve some of its most pressing problems. And we couldn't have done any of that without our sponsors and partners, including Midstory, who is hosting tonight's Hack Night. So thank you so much for all the support that we've received from everyone here who's made Erie Hack possible. And so just before we get into Hack Nights, as I said earlier, I wanted to provide a quick overview of what is left in store for these next few weeks of Erie Hack. So right now we are in hacking time. And as mentioned, we are currently hosting, or Midstory is currently hosting their hack night. And while today is the last hack night, we actually have just a few workshops and webinars added thanks to our incredible mentors who have volunteered their time and really wanted to give these webinars. So be sure to check that out on the schedule tab on Event Tornado. They were just added and we're very excited for these mentors to help foster their technical expertise to help create these solutions. And remember that mentorship is going on. Mentors, you can find that on our mentors tab on Event Tornado. So please sign up for one-on-one mentorship. There are a few mentors actually available tomorrow, including Jen Grieser, Bobby Oliver, and Dr. Christopher Winslow. There are so many mentors available next week. And I'm really excited that the calendar is now available, and that's what the QR code is for. You can, that has all the information with our, on how to sign up for mentors. You can just click the Calendly links during their slots. That also has information around the timing of quarterfinals, as well as semifinals and finals. So be sure to book that on your calendar if you haven't already. And just a few tips: make sure you introduce yourself in the event chat on Event Tornado, as well as the Zoom chat. And remember, if you meet someone interesting, whether that be through the event chat or through Zoom, you can send a direct message on the event chat and or on Zoom. And once you create that team, you can use Event Tornado will automatically create a channel for you and your team on the event chat, and you can use the video call function to work on your project and discuss. If you need any help, please contact me. My email will be shown here at the end. You can also contact me if you want to set up a Zoom call to make it easier to work on your project with your team. Okay, and remember, the team formation deadline is in about 15 days at 11:59 p.m. You need to make sure to post your idea and have your team set by then, and have all those members filled out on Event Tornado. And then from there, I will place you in one of these quarterfinals, depending on the location of your team members. And so remember, if your team consists of members from Cleveland and or Buffalo and or Toledo, you will be placed in either a Cleveland quarterfinal, a Buffalo quarterfinal, or a Toledo quarterfinal. And a few teams from each quarterfinal will be chosen to advance to semifinals on November 4th. And from there, a few teams from semifinals will be chosen to advance to finals that will take place on November 18th. And of course, we can't forget about prizes. First place has a grand prize of $30,000, and second place will be $15,000. And this doesn't include the mini challenges, which were released today. And some of the mentors that are here tonight actually helped create these mini challenges. And there will be additional dollars attached to some of these as the weeks progress, and there will also be mini challenges added to this list on a rolling basis. So be sure to check this document as well as the event chat and any updates you get from me. Now we'll get straight into Hack Nights. So I'm about to turn this over to Sam, who will introduce a few mentors, and this will last till about 6:30, and then we will have a discussion between the mentors and the participants. So Sam, if you want to take it away.
Great. Thanks for that information, Felicia. It's very helpful. As we all know, Toledo, Ohio was at the forefront of conversations surrounding water quality when we shut down our drinking water for nearly 3 days amidst harmful algal blooms in the western basin of Lake Erie. While many researchers and scholars have really been working hard on these problems for quite a long time, I think that specific moment, for us, was what brought these questions and uncertainties to the public consciousness here in Northwest Ohio. I think we're all starting to realize how important it is to protect our natural resources. And that is why, since our inception, Midstory's inception, we really focused on working with community leaders, businesses, and organizations to address issues related to water quality and specifically education related to those areas. It has been more than 7 years now since the 2014 water crisis. And although much of the public, I believe, has forgotten about these pressing issues, we certainly have not. And I have a group of folks here today who are evidence that work is still very much ongoing. And in fact, this very competition and you yourselves participating in all of this are a key part of the larger solution. So thank you. Tonight we have 6 amazing mentors: Regina Collins, Edith Kippenhahn, Marilyn DeFore from the city of Toledo, Lauren Rush from the city of Perrysburg, Dr. Todd Crail from the University of Toledo, and Dr. Kevin McClooney from Bowling Green State University, all of whom have devoted their lives to protecting the precious natural resources we have in this region. We're truly fortunate to have such champions in our community, and I hope we really can take more time to appreciate the largely hidden work that they do every day to make our community safer, cleaner, and more sustainable. So thank you, Regina, Edith, Marilyn, Lauren, Todd, and Kevin for joining us tonight. So I guess just to start us off, we're going to have a very short 20 or 30-minute panel discussion, and we're going to break out in different rooms and then kind of go from there. But to these panelists, perhaps we can go around the room and begin by introducing yourselves, the kind of work that you do, and if you're doing work research, and kind of introduce the work that you're working on currently. Maybe we can start with Todd.
Hi, I'm Todd Crail. I'm a lecturer in the Department of Environmental Sciences. My responsibilities to my position are all instructional, and a lot of the work that I've done was to expand out what a classroom is and get our students working with community partners across Lucas County. I've been kind of the spearhead of getting landscape scale conversions of UT's campus turned into native plantings, water retention, and building that into our curriculum so that the students can understand we're not just planting a bunch of tall plants everywhere that have these bees flying all over them. Yeah, I've done quite a bit of work restoration with Irwin Prairie and talking about how it stores water, and also urban agriculture across the county. And that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Right, next down my line is Edith.
Had to unmute, too much background noise. So I'm Edith Kippenhahn. I work for the City of Toledo Environmental Services, where I am a senior environmental specialist. My primary objectives are to make sure that any of our stormwater runoff is following the requirements for construction and post-construction sites. But I also interface with a lot of other groups, many of whom are represented on this call, to do better things in our local and regional environment to make water quality the best that we can get by keeping pollutants in a place where we can capture the water and treat it, and only clean water exits.
Great, Marilyn.
Hi, I'm Marilyn Dufour. I'm a senior environmental specialist, also in the stormwater section. I work with Edith. I'm the team leader for public education and outreach, public participation and involvement, and illicit discharge detection and elimination, which is a program that inspects in dry weather roughly 800 outfalls every permit cycle to identify flows that shouldn't be in them and hopefully eliminate the sources of those flows. And if I know you in the community, it's probably through some of our larger public participation programs like Clean Your Streams, the Toledo Lucas County Rain Garden Initiative, and Sacred Grounds Toledo.
Great, Regina.
Hi, I'm Regina Collins with the City of Toledo. I work closely with Edith and Marilyn. I'm what's called the Chief of Water Resources, so stormwater is under me, as well as pre-treatment. So I help to manage both of those permits. I work on a lot of grant applications. I participate with education and outreach. So I do it all, I guess, at some level. Thank you.
All right, we'll hop over to Kevin.
Hi, Kevin McClooney from Bowling Green State University. I'm an associate professor in the biology department. My background is I'm an ecologist, specifically got started as a stream side ecologist or riparian ecologist. I've done a lot of different work in both aquatic and terrestrial systems. Just briefly, I'll talk about a few of the things that I've been involved with here. Got a current project looking at wastewater chemicals and their influence on stream food webs. Additionally, been involved in some work looking at using phosphate oxygen isotopes to trace sources of phosphate in the watershed, as well as soil health aspects of recycling of phosphate in agricultural soils. And recently got involved with some wetland restoration work as well, looking at the role of plants in nutrient cycling there.
Great, thanks, Kevin. Last but not least, Lauren.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren Rush. I work for the City of Perrysburg. I formerly worked for the City of Toledo, so I know Regina and Edith and Marilyn very well. Here at the City of Perrysburg, though, I run the stormwater program, and that handles all of the water quality and quantity, so flood control, as well as improving the quality of water that goes out of our pipes through a lot of those similar efforts, checking the outfalls, outreach and education, planting natives, inspecting the construction sites. I review all of the plans that come through the city for anything that's being built, anything that you can think of there.
Great, thanks, Lauren. Appreciate you all introducing yourself. I want to start off with a really general question, so feel free to tackle this the way that you're most comfortable with. Obviously it's been 7 years since 2014, and we had our drinking water shut down, and of course we all know what happened back then. I think since then there was a lot of funding for sure poured into water quality and new initiatives. I'm wondering, what are your reflections over the last 7 years? Do you think, we've, grown in leaps and bounds, or you think there's still areas that need to be improved? And if there are, what are those areas? I would want to start with Kevin, perhaps in the academic field, and then go over to Todd.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think there's been improvements in terms of people are making more of an effort to put the resources into doing various practices from agricultural fields into ditches, into wetlands, to try to reduce nutrient inputs. But there's still a lot we don't know, and there's still a lot we're trying to figure out. And it's still, these are really difficult problems, right? Wicked problems, some people call them, right? because they're complex and they involve social ecological systems, right? And so, getting these changes to happen in the ways that need to in order to make a difference in the lake is challenging.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of funding. I haven't seen much change. And I think that's what we need to understand is what the crops are grown for. The public doesn't understand that we're growing that to feed cars, that we're growing that to feed cows and chickens, and that without cutting off the source, we're not going to move forward. We're coming up with a lot of technological ways to deal with the problem, but as Wendell Berry puts it, these are technological solutions to technological problems, which just turns into more technological mischief. And I think COVID's really pulled the plug even on what students want to hear about and know about. That's far more pressing. But one of the ecological laws is everything's connected. And I think it's very important for them to understand that these high levels of affluence and privilege that we enjoy in our society are connected in the same way. And so that's the way I think I'm going to retool the way that I talk about it going forward.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Anybody from the city of Toledo or Lauren from Perrysburg want to comment?
I think I'm seeing a trend where people are recognizing that it's going to take multiple small fixes across many different areas that impact the water. There is no one quick fix. And researchers and city officials and the public, we all have to work on protecting our resources, but we also have to understand what we do on a daily basis, like Todd said, really impacts our environment, and our water is just the first thing that we're seeing.
Yeah.
I would add environmental problems and issues can seem really overwhelming a lot of times because they are so complex that there are so many different things that people can do and so many different ways that you can approach it that sometimes people throw their hands up and they do nothing because it seems like there's nothing that they can do that'll actually make a difference. And that's not true. You have to break it down into small pieces. And so there are different niches that people can get into, and there are different niches for funding for things as well. And trying to do it all is never going to work, but there are things that people can do.
Yeah, I think, going back to this point that I think Todd started talking about, which is right now in the midst of the pandemic, obviously we have a lot of factors at play, and specifically one that we're considering, and something that Cleveland Water Alliance certainly is considering, is the idea of equitability, access to the water, and who has access to the water, and that will cause certain people to care and certain people not to care. How do you begin addressing those issues where, even I think there was a study in Cuyahoga County, 90% of the waterfront is privately owned, and yet we know that that water is affecting people not just within that waterfront, but elsewhere in different neighborhoods. And there's a lot of different, whether it's through recreational access, or like when we had the drinking water shut down on us, who were the ones that were the most affected. So I guess all this wrapped up into a question of, how do we begin addressing these issues of education, of this human factor, the social factor that Todd is mentioning? How do we begin to address any of these issues? Maybe Marilyn will start us off, or Edith.
Go ahead, Marilyn.
Oh, thanks.
The hard question.
Well, I think one of the ways that the water crisis helped us is it made the invisible visible. And so the infrastructure that we have for drinking water, for wastewater, all of a sudden became kind of the center of discussion. And I think that's helped us. But I think that in order to move it forward, we have to realize, like you just said, Sam, that the real growth has got to happen in our neighborhoods. It's got to happen, you know, among the communities, all of them. And so one of the things that we have done in partnership with a lot of these other folks is start looking for hubs that can start getting that word into the community. You know, one example of that is the National Wildlife Federation Sacred Grounds program, which uses faith communities, which are critical in all neighborhoods, you know, to start spreading the message of how important, how all of us behave is to water quality. You know, one of our important messages is we're all part of the problem. We all need to be part of the solution. And like Lauren said earlier, there's a whole spectrum of ways to get involved. You know, it doesn't have to be a big thing. It can be a small thing. It can be putting a rain barrel on your house and using that water on site. So I think making those one-on-one connections in the community and recruiting those ambassadors that we need to do it is how we get started.
Edith, would you like to add?
Yeah, I was going to add in that we need to start younger. And I don't want to say STEM education, core curriculum, any of that, because that's just going to muddy the waters, but getting our younger students into the environment to see that they left a footprint out in an arid desert. Now a plant's not, lichens aren't going to grow for 10 years because they impacted. They need to really start understanding their impact in their local ecosystem and what the ripple effect is and how they can go out and clean a stream bank by their school and how that is something really great. And then what the ripple effect in the community will be beyond water quality, because we're all suffering. If we can't drink our drinking water, we have to buy bottled water, and we know bottled water isn't better, and it's certainly more expensive.
Yeah.
I like to add something to that. What Marilyn didn't say is that as part of her public outreach and education and participation and involvement, a lot of some of these things are already built into our stormwater permit, which requires us to go out into the community and try to reach a large segment each year. So we are working on those small things and taking those small steps and building the relationships with the communities as well as with other organizations within the city of Toledo or the surrounding area to help spread the message. Like Maryland works on Clean Your Streams diligently every year, and which is, you know, a clean bank, stream bank cleanup. I mean, so there are all sorts of things that we do. Erie Hack, we've always been, you know, part of this. So we do understand that it takes the small steps, and we do work towards that, and we try to do that in collaboration with our community partners.
Yeah, I appreciate these responses. And I think when Edith was talking about young people, and I think that's an area that I know Todd is very passionate about. So this is geared more toward Todd, and now Kevin has students as well. You know, what are you seeing among the young people? Are things changing? And do you think this is an area that we really need to press more specifically in this region to get more young people involved in the solution?
Yes. I mean, I mean, this is what I'm seeing with students coming in. And when you are talking about water insecurity and you're talking about food insecurity and you're talking about a lack of access to resources in a place like the city of Toledo, and you're talking to people who were able to avoid that, they're pissed that it's out there and they didn't know about it. They're upset. This is, you know, your standard 18 to 22-year-old feels like you just kept me away from this. And they, you know, their parents might be like, well, yeah, I was trying to keep you safe and give you good resources and give you all these things. But why didn't I know people who had already food insecurity, then were the ones most profoundly affected by the water insecurity? And so I think really our society, it's not building farms downtown, it's building farms in Sylvania. You got a big lot, why aren't you growing food on it? The people with resources are really the ones that we need to turn the camera towards and be like, what are you doing? You know, we want to celebrate successes with people gaining agency in their communities, certainly. But I think, you know, a lot of us are just able to, and this is what I talk about in class, I can do it too. The damnable thing about our society is I can make a choice that once informed and forced to think about it, I just like that can make a choice that's opposite of that. It's just so easy. And that is one of the biggest social factors that I think this is a lot of the COVID problem. We've been safe with our technology. We've been safe with our distance. We've been safe with our affluence. And I just feel like it's not my problem. And we need to come up with compassionate ways to explain that to people, where I'm not pointing the finger at you. I point the finger back at myself first. And here's what I'm not doing. Here's what I could do better, you know. But getting that translational hour, right? Everything's in 30-second bits. How do you get people to sit down? And that's my favorite moment, when the students realize it's actually a privilege to sit around and think about this crap for an hour and 20 minutes twice a week for 15 weeks, you know? So I don't know. It's hard. It's hard.
Yeah. Human behavior, man, that's a tricky challenge, right? And I don't know if I have a great answer for this. I'll say, you know, I agree, I have some students that are like that. I also have students that really just don't understand what caused the Toledo water crisis. They still think it's something else. They've heard that it's something else. And so we have some nice conversations about that, you know, and how do you move people along? And, you know, education is part of it, but people also, I think, want to do what's easy, right? And if it's harder, they don't want to do it. We live in a society that is not set up to make some of the choices that, you know, some of us here might think we should make, right? Those are the harder choices. They take more time or effort. And so, you know, I don't know, I'd say one of the things that is potentially good about the Erie Hack is you could think about how can you make those choices easier, right? That there's an opportunity there. I think there are technological solutions that can help reduce some of the barriers to adopting different practices, right? So, yeah, I'll leave it there.
I remember way back when I was in college, because I took a class in Egyptian history, learning about how the Nile River flooded the farmers' fields every year. And that's how they got their nutrients onto the field. Of course, this was all pre-chemistry and chemical fertilizers. And then once a dam was built, of course, that cycle was broken. And so then they became dependent on chemical fertilizers. So like you mentioned, making our farming easier, more profitable, quicker, convenient, we stepped out of sync with nature. And we didn't realize the impacts at the time. We didn't realize the impacts of doing that because we drove towards profit and convenience.
Yeah, thinking about, where we are now though, and getting from here to some other place, we can't just stop farming, right? This is one of the reasons a wicked problem. And we've talked about equity, but there's a lot of different ways to interpret that. And one of them, you still need to think about the farmers. It's not just, it's at all levels. It's one of the things that makes it this complex problem. And I think to talk a little bit about the questions that I've seen in the chat, there's some interesting ideas in terms of, well, one thing is carbon sequestration, back to climate change. Farm fields could be used as carbon storage mechanisms. Increase the carbon content of a farm field. Not only are you storing carbon from the atmosphere, but you're also capturing nutrients and maintaining them in the soil where the farmer wants them, and potentially increasing yield at the same time. So you're reducing nutrient losses and increasing yields. So there's some potential win-win solutions that people are starting to talk about, and in some places in the country have started to take off. I haven't seen that here in Ohio yet, so we'll see.
Marilyn and I were recently on a farm tour, and they are talking about that they want to use their farm fields to capture carbon. And they're also using buffer strips, which I think Chad just mentioned, yes. But then you have the other farmer who says, well, I want to use every single square inch of my farmland that I can, and doesn't plant the buffer strip. So how do you handle that?
I think the issue there is the way it's incentivized. They're incentivized, if they're incentivized to maximize yield, you can't maximize for any other variable. You can only maximize for yield. And we have the most efficient system of creating yield. There's no question about it. It's marvelous. But everything goes someplace and there's no free lunch. And so, and I'm extremely pro farmer. I love saying you can't criticize a farmer with a mouthful of food, but at the same time, they are being incentivized to not grow actual food. And I think we also, as a society, need to reckon with that. There's a balance somewhere in between. It's not going to be one way or the other. It's not a zero-sum game. And potentially, maybe that's the thing that everyone needs to understand. It's not one or the other. It's the more diverse the portfolio is, the stronger the portfolio is, the more resilient the portfolio is. And we have some perturbances coming up. We know this. So
I think we left off talking about climate change, right? Or that was part of it. And that presents a problem. You're increasing precipitation in this region. Even if you don't change, even if you decrease how much nutrients you're applying to agricultural fields, the runoff might not change because you're still getting more precipitation leading to more runoff. So it's, so you kind of have to take multiple approaches. Just like one approach by itself is not gonna solve this.
And we know all the infrastructure right now is aging. And I think when we talk about stormwater, wastewater, maybe someone from the city can speak a little bit more about that. In terms of climate change, we're seeing increased rainfalls, and our infrastructure certainly was not built to address those needs. And even some systems are even together wastewater with stormwater. And when that happens, right, you have a lot of bad things. So maybe someone from the city can talk more about that.
Sure. that was the first thing that came to mind to me when you mentioned climate change and what we're seeing. The city of Toledo was among the first in Ohio to receive a consent order to create a long-term control plan for their combined sewer overflows. And when we received that consent order, US EPA had not quite bought into the idea of green infrastructure. So our solution is almost entirely gray infrastructure, okay? Concrete tunnels and some sewer separation, some large storage tanks, and some auxiliary treatment. And the intention when we designed this plan was to reduce our combined sewer overflows by 80%. This started back in 2002. And now that we have completed construction, the capacity that we designed for is no longer what it was then. You know, we're already seeing a loss in our reduction, the amount that we're reducing those overflows, because gray infrastructure has a capacity that is being exceeded by these extreme rain events. And the other thing that I see in my job inspecting outfalls is that capacity, that extra stormwater that is coursing through those pipes is really having an effect on the structures. We go out, we see a lot of storm sewer outfalls that are buried because of erosion, that are collapsed because of the pressure that they're put under, and they're aging, you know, they're over time. So climate change is really having a huge impact on infrastructure that's already degrading somewhat because of age.
Anyone else want to add? Edith?
Well, and to add to that, standards for what you're going to do when you build a new building or you redevelop an area within city limits are set by an advisory board, but also politicians. And if we can't agree that climate change is happening, or we shouldn't be designing for 100-year floods, we need to be designing for 250-year floods, our standards are always lagging. So even the new stuff, like Marilyn just said, what was put in the ground 10 years ago is already now out of date. And we certainly saw that, I mean, on two separate occasions. We saw it on October 14th, and then we saw it again last week. One was a massive downpour in a couple hours, and our storm sewer system couldn't keep up. And then the following week, it was over a period of 2.5 days, but it was so much that the soil just couldn't hold it. And we flooded everywhere where we thought we had planned for flooding.
And on this, oh, Regina, go ahead.
Oh, the only thing I'm gonna add to that is, yes, we do understand the impacts of climate change. And yes, what Marilyn and Edith said, exactly true. But engineering services, environmental services, some other areas of the city of Toledo, we realize that. So we try where we can to implement green infrastructure as a result of climate change. It's to help our water quantity and our water quality. And so we do that through grants and through other types of projects. So green infrastructure was not included as part of our long-term control plan, and we realized that, and we know that we couldn't go back, we couldn't retrofit it. It was just a done deal. But we have a vision, and our vision is to implement as much green infrastructure as we can to help alleviate some of the impacts of climate change.
Yeah, and in regards to this green infrastructure, I believe some folks in the room as well are part of these grassroots efforts to bring people in the community to construct rain gardens, pollinator gardens, et cetera, et cetera. And I think, you know, I'm curious as to, you know, knowing that those initiatives exist, you know, I'm thinking what my conversation with Marilyn previously, what are those things that you think the community would need that perhaps a technical solution could help and assist them with some of those more grassroots solutions that we mentioned?
Well, one of the grassroots efforts that you mentioned since about 2007 is the Toledo Lucas County Rain Garden Initiative. And we have put together one of the many challenges that Felicia introduced to you earlier, hopefully to also reach that younger audience that likes to use technology for solving problems. The problem that we have is we have terrific partners throughout the community, but we don't have people dedicated specifically to this one thing. We all have a bunch of things that we work in, you know, areas that we work in. And so we had proposed, for instance, a rain garden application, a mobile friendly web application that could help us, once we introduce the idea, have people kind of become their own mentors, have something to help lead them through the decision-making process, something to help them see their individual impact and the collective impact that people have when they implement these solutions at home. You know, residential property is in most cities the biggest opportunity we have to implement green infrastructure and have it properly maintained, because people care about their yards and love gardening. And that was something that was kind of a mixed bag in COVID. You know, we had a lot more people gardening, so we were getting a lot more interest in it. But having that community support was not as easy to get across. So so there's an example of a way that we can educate and back up education when we can't be in all those places, you know, that people need us to be, to feel comfortable implementing these solutions.
And I guess that will lead me to, thanks for that, Marilyn. That was very comprehensive. It leads me to my last question for our panelists tonight, which is, you know, I know there's a lot of challenges that you all experienced in your day-to-day work. If there is a challenge, a problem that you think you want to talk a little bit about that perhaps could have a technical solution, you know, what would that problem be? And it might not be specifically pertaining to your work. Maybe it's generally related to water quality, but we're just kind of brainstorming a little bit for our participants. You know, what are those areas that you think really need to be solved? And thus far, we've not found a very a good solution for. Who wants to start us off? Tough question, I know.
I would say access to data for the lay person. Coming from a field that had nothing to do with water quality except for a water treatment plant, and now being in stormwater and writing grants, there is so much information out there and so many cool maps and all of these different agencies that are working on the same thing. And I don't think the normal average layperson even has an idea of how to tackle that. So we say we need to do better on education. Yeah, it's a very complex problem, but we've got to find a way to get better access to data for everybody where it's understandable.
Yeah, I think that's that inaccessibility or that separation, right? That's our problem with waste in general, is that we don't have to see it. We don't have to see it in our energy generation. We don't have to see it in our chemical generation. We don't have to see it in our food generation. it happens someplace else. And quite honestly, this division between town and country is on multiple levels. The identity politics that we've adopted, this is another classic example of how the two processes have just become disconnected from one another. And helping some, you know, if I could, the technological solution, it for me is some way to get my students access to the farmers. Honestly, it's very difficult to go across that bridge. You know, I'm the liberal white guy who's just trying to build his career up, right? And so something that can bridge that gap and find the farmers where it's convenient for them to tell their side of the issue and convenient for the administrators, the compliance folks to talk to the public, with the public, among the public. I mean, that's something that I can't see any other way besides using technology to get those groups all together.
One other, on the other side of my job, the non-education part, having field tests that are inexpensive and easy to use. In some cases, one of the biggest areas that are problematic from stormwater outfalls is fecals. And it's a pretty general test. It takes cities that are actually looking more closely at it to determine actual sources of fecals are using very expensive lab DNA testing. And most of us can't afford to do that. So having some way to discern fecal sources would be very, very helpful. In some cases to identify that there's an infrastructure problem, and in some cases to learn that what we need to be doing is educating people that they need to pick up after their pet, or that we need to control the geese, or, you know, the things that are living in our storm sewer system. So it's just really hard to discern those things, and most of us don't have money to figure out, you know, what they are using expensive lab testing. So another thought.
I would also like to see more citizen science that's accessible to everyone, whether it's a sampling of outfalls or even rain gauge data. If people are keeping rain gauges at home, having somewhere centralized that they can put that information. It could even be something as simple as that, just more information that's accessible to everyone so they can get a better idea of what's happening around them.
I love how a lot of your responses are about data and information. So it just shows you how critical it is to have access to that and have some way to actually start defining some of those numbers and making sense of those numbers. So yeah, did we get around to everyone? I think Regina, maybe Kevin, do you have anything else to add?
No, I don't have anything to add.
Great.
We've been having a fun discussion.
Yeah, I see that.
Remind me of the question. I think I got the gist, but the specifics.
If there was a problem that you think, you know, is pressing that doesn't have quite a solution yet in your job, what would that be?
I mean, I guess that's my job, is to look for those
or at least with some kind of technical solution.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that about data availability and accessibility is an issue. I think there was some good discussion about for the city and for the community, but also for the farmers themselves, you know. And so this is, you know, many of these farmers do not want their nutrients to run off of their field. They paid for those nutrients, you know, they added that fertilizer. They want to keep them on the field, right? And so anything that can be done to help them maintain that and have to apply less materials to their own fields, they will like. So, you know, I think that there's some potential there as well.
That's a great idea. I haven't heard much in that department quite yet. So I think that's a fantastic ending. We'll open up to just a general Q&A. We're not going to do breakout rooms for the sake of time. So any individual can unmute their mic and ask a question to any of these mentors, and we can kind of start from there.
I have a question for, I think it was Lauren and Edith. They both shared about how solving the water issue, maybe the best approach is to break the issue into bite-sized pieces and fix it with many small solutions. And I was wondering, what are some of those small areas that you think are part of this solution? Or in what ways can we break down the issue into smaller pieces?
That's a great question. So from my perspective, stormwater wise, and it's the same for the city of Toledo, we have certain things that we focus on that the EPA has found to be sources of stormwater pollution. So nutrients is obviously a big one, and you can break that down into a lot of different topics. So that can be sewage, whether it's from, you know, a municipality, or it can be from home sewage treatment systems like septic tanks. So tackling issues involving that. Pet waste is another source of nutrients. So getting people to pick up their dog poop sounds silly. You'd think everyone does that. They don't. Nutrients could also be fertilizer on a lawn or a farm field. So tackling issues regarding how people apply their lawn fertilizer or the companies that they hire to do it, and making sure that that's being done appropriately. Obviously, you know, agricultural animal waste is another side of things that could be broken down a lot of different ways. So then, other than nutrients, we also have the planting of the natives, right? So doing the rain gardens that help return the water back into the ground, providing habitat for our pollinators, our birds, our butterflies, our bees. All of these different topics might not solve the entire problem, but breaking off and specializing in one of those areas really be very powerful, especially when you can share then what you people and get them as passionate about it as you are, and kind of see that impact as then it trickles down and they teach other people, they teach other people, because a lot comes down to people not actually knowing what they're supposed to do. The quantity of people that I've talked to that don't even know the difference between a storm drain out in the road that carries the water to a creek, as opposed to the drains in their house that go to a wastewater treatment plant, is huge. So you don't have to know all of it, but if any of those small topics and lots of them out there, my Clear Choices Clean Water website, it has a lot of those campaigns on there, and people can pledge what they're going to do, whether it's planting natives or cleaning their septic tank or picking up their poop. I do recommend that as a good resource, as a place to start.
And I would add to that, one example that the city did was to decouple the downspouts from your house from the storm sewer system. So every opportunity we have to get stormwater runoff onto vegetation and not into gray infrastructure, I think is the best thing we can do, because then the water gets treated as it's infiltrating the soil. So we just really need to do a better mix of getting nature back into our urban impervious surface areas. And that starts with your house. You can do that in an apartment building. It doesn't have to be necessarily your own private house.
I'm going to throw another wrench into the works and mention I&I. Because we separate all of our sewers here in Perrysburg, so we don't have combined sewers anymore. So hopefully we're not pumping sewage events from our sanitary system. But I'll tell you what, it still happens sometimes. And that I&I is infiltration and inflow. That's when stormwater gets into the sanitary sewer system by leaky sanitary pipes, or if you have your downspouts or your tile drains around your house, if you have your sump pump tied into the sanitary sewer, and that happens a lot in older houses. So looking for those things, that's a huge deal, and telling other people about it to see if they can disconnect it too. Another good place to start.
Thank you both. I appreciate it.
Any other questions?
I have a question I want to ask Kevin. You mentioned about your research about the toxin and some drug disposal in the river. I want to ask you, like, according to your research, is that reached to a level we need to worry about? Also, Marilyn just mentioned about even the fecal thing. She need to use DNA to test. So what's your way to test those toxin or drug residue in the river? Is that like feasible to the common people to use, or is still very expensive?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, at the moment, the techniques that we're using are expensive and difficult. So we're measuring a lot of different pharmaceutical chemicals that are going into these streams, illicit drugs and over-the-counter medication, and some other compounds as well. And that's an expensive, difficult process. But there are some cheaper methods if you do targeted chemicals, like specific chemicals that you're looking for. So, if you can identify those that you think are of concern, that might be, there might be ways to make it at a cost that, that anybody could potentially implement.
3M has a Petri film, a series of Petri films that will, for example, you could do fecal coliforms or E. coli separately for about $1 a sheet. And you apply a milliliter of sample, and you gestate it at a certain temperature for a certain period, and then you can get your count pretty inexpensively. So there are products. I mean, E. coli is a pretty good surrogate for a whole host of other chemicals that are potentially present and could ask questions that would, then warrant Kevin coming in and, all right, so what other things are here? We've got a hot spot. Why? Number one, and two, what else is coming along with it?
Yeah, one of the things we're trying to figure out is whether certain chemicals commonly co-occur with each other, and we've found some evidence of that. So we haven't yet figured out why this combination of chemicals is found here and that combination of chemicals is found there, and they're different in different places. So that's sort of the next step that we're working on now at the local scale. But we've done some national analyses as well, and so it is interesting. You could do something like that to see the likelihood that there might be some kind of chemicals there, but exactly what chemicals is complex. And and if you want to think about the effects on things living in streams, it could be anything from little insects to fish. Some of these are what we call synergistic or antagonistic. So sometimes they could work together to harm the biota, or sometimes one could harm it, the other one, when it's present, could prevent that harm, right? And so it's actually really it's another wicked problem, because we're putting, thousands of chemicals into our waterways, and we don't know how they interact with each other. And how do you even design a study to think about all those combinations, right? So we have to make it a little more tractable, and that's one of the things we're working on.
I guess I have a question kind of following up on what you're talking about currently. I guess my question is in regards to early detection and scale, because what I hear are a few things there as you're going through and you're testing for different levels of toxicity and what's present in the different various water sources. I guess what I want to know is the scale of it. So within our different regions, where are the places that we're looking? Are we looking just at the major waterways? Are we looking at other pockets? And also considering, because of scale, how we might involve, as we were talking earlier, citizen science, how we can involve people like Todd Crail's classroom to go out and participate and maybe collecting, we've already identified through early detection, maybe particular chemicals or particular things we want to monitor. And so for a semester, we're monitoring through going out and testing in these particular waterways. We're following that and starting to collect that data, because it sounds to me like that data is not present and comprehensive across maybe all the waterways to be collecting all of these data sets. So is that something where we can come in and, number one, we're able to prioritize, we're able to early detect, and we're also able to tap into resources, manpower for the scale of this. So I'm thinking of ways in which we could come in to bring together some collaborations to make that happen. Is there, I guess, so scale, coming back to scale is what I'm considering, and also what is it that you're prioritizing as you're doing the testing of these things?
Is that a question for me?
What is your scale, and what is it that you're prioritizing?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that was aimed at me. So, for me as a scientist, I think about the kinds of contrasts I want to make, right? And so I choose locations that allow me to make those contrasts, hopefully without bias. So it's definitely a limited number of locations because the resources are finite. They might sound big, but it's really not much money to carry out a large scale study. So it's a challenge. Scaling it up is a real challenge, and some people take the approach of using hydrological models to do scaling. And so you measure things in just certain locations and you scale up with hydrological models, but there's assumptions there. It's not always perfect. So having more measurements in more locations is always better. And so if we can think of citizen science programs that allow us to get data that can be validated, that we can trust, that's extremely useful, not only for scientists, but for decision makers. So yeah, I agree.
And I guess this is a question more towards the city. So you were talking earlier, Marilyn, I believe, you were talking about the different kinds in the outfall when you're doing the testing in those sites, about the data that you're collecting, the different chemicals that you're seeing there. And I believe you also mentioned earlier in your panel discussion about how those things are coming in, but that at this point, the city's managing them. We're not getting them in our residential water, any of that, because it's being treated out. So I guess my question is, what are the limits? Is the city, I'm sure the city has like set limits on how high things can go. When they recognize that those are in the water, there's certain safe levels, and also there's targets of what you have to remove. Is that data available as far as in regards to those chemicals and what those limits are? Is that something that is accessible to, folks in our area that can be used for building and collecting studies?
Well, let me just say we're in the process of revisiting some of what we've seen. Currently, we're using some of the thresholds that have been developed by the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District, because we really only had 4 parameters for which we had action thresholds in our manual. I've only been doing this a couple of years, so we're in the process of kind of reworking how we're doing things, because we are starting to understand that when Ohio EPA says they want all outfalls looked at, they mean all, and there's a lot more of them. But yes, our manual, although in the process of being upgraded, is available. Neoswords is available. What we're looking at is parameters to help us identify sources a little bit. So we look at things that tell us, are we looking at tap water? Are we looking at groundwater? Are we looking at somebody's swimming pool discharge in terms of the most common things? But we look at fecals, obviously, to determine whether we might have some kind of sewage leak or failing septic system, or a place where, as Lauren mentioned earlier, infiltration and inflow is bringing a maintenance concern in our sanitary sewer into our storm sewer. So one of the things that in our attempt to upgrade our program we're trying to do is learn how to profile those things, so we have a better feel what it looks like when we have a illicitly tapped sewer into our storm as compared to when groundwater is carrying it into our storm, or something like that, if that makes sense. But yes, we have 4 or 5 of the parameters that we look at. We also look at phosphorus, and ammonia, and fluoride, again, to help us with our tap water and groundwater delineation, that kind of thing. And that data is not organized for the public at this point, but we're working on trying to get a dashboard where you can see a little bit more of what we're doing out there. Does that help?
Yeah, I wanted to add 2 things to what Marilyn said. The first is to the last part. That's our mini challenge, is how to take all of that data that we get out in the field and turn it into something that then will get us where we can start making solid decisions and then start making that publicly available. So that is one of the many challenges. The other thing that I wanted to call out is when Kevin's talking about chemicals, understand that a lot of the testing that is being done is trying to find an aspirin in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. So you're not testing things that are easily available to see, even with very specific tests, and that's what's making them so expensive. But we have found out that for instance, a lot of the pharmaceutica that are being dumped down toilet drains in senior nursing homes or assisted living facilities, we now can find easily in our drinking water sources. But our testing has also gotten that good that we can find it at those lower quantities. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't have a negative impact. And we're seeing that in the ecosystem. And we have for a while now.
Yeah, it's really complex that, some chemicals at very low concentrations, they can still have an effect, but others, yeah, it's got to be much higher. And so, there's that complexity as well. It's yeah.
Hey, excuse me. Hey, y'all. Max Herzog here with Cleveland Water Alliance. And I just wanted to take a minute first to thank all of our panelists and mentors that have taken time with us this evening, not just to answer our questions and lead us in this really constructive conversation, but also to be so active in the chat, having the secondary conversation there, asking or answering asking and answering some of the more technical questions, really digging in deep there. This has really just been a fantastic discussion in general. Right now, I'd like to take a minute though to pivot to the next or kind of the wrap up phase of our hack night tonight, which will be kind of what we call fire pitching, or sharing out either your team, your hack idea, what you're looking for to bring to your team, what you might bring to a team, or maybe even just an issue you're looking to see solved. But before we dive into that, I just want to take a minute to acknowledge the fact that earlier on this call, we had some really disruptive events and unaffiliated individuals that we don't endorse at Cleveland Water Alliance, or any of our partners endorse, shared some graphic and offensive content. And I really want to just apologize on behalf of Cleveland Water Alliance and Erie Hack and all the organizers and folks here. That's not what we stand for as a community, or as individuals or as organizations. And I really just I was very sad that when that happened, obviously for many reasons, because it was upsetting, but also because I was really excited about, this conversation. And I was pleasantly surprised to see that so many folks rejoined and that we really had a robust discussion still, that our panelists stayed on and, shared everything. And, that's not to say anything bad about anyone who dropped off, because obviously that was a very intense experience and people respond to that in different ways. But really appreciate all of you for staying on and having this conversation and still engaging with us. Definitely feel free to reach out. I'll drop my email in the chat if you want to talk about anything or have any specific concerns. We'll definitely be looking into more security for our Zoom meetings. But if you all have any best practices to share around that, would definitely obviously be open to that as well.